Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our latest lockdown webinar, Demystifying the Dark Web. Thank you all for joining us. I hope everybody is safe and well in Dubai, Abu Dhabi, or wherever else you may be joining us from. Over the course of the next hour, we will hopefully be giving you something to think about as we explore this intriguing threat that is the dark web and the various risks that it poses to us as both companies and individuals. Today, we will explore how criminal gangs may be stealing both your company data and that of your customers to create fake profiles on the dark web and use these to set up illicit businesses, profiting from the sale of drugs, horrific crimes, and even murder. So is your business or are you individually exposed to this threat? Here to answer these important questions, we have none other than Professor Richard Benham, the world's first formal professor of cyber security management and best known as a celebrated author for creating the National MBA in cybersecurity with the support of the Prime Minister in 2014. This webinar is brought to you in partnership with the Capital Club, a private members club in Dubai, and I would like to extend a particularly warm welcome to all the Capital Club members who have joined us today, and Acuris, a trusted and independent provider of data intelligence for anti-money laundering, anti-corruption, and cybersecurity professionals. I would also like to introduce you to Nick Parfitt, Head of Market Planning at Acuris Risk Intelligence, who will be moderating the discussion with us today. My name is James Whiteman, and I'm the MD of Themis MENA, a risk management and technology firm specializing in financial crime. As well as our core financial crime audit and advisory, technology and outsourcing services, much of our work is focused on threat-based insight and intelligence through our think tank. And we are very proud to be partnering with Acuris and Professor Benham to bring you this introduction to the dark web. We also have, let's just have a look, 92 of you wonderful guests that have joined us today. So thank you very much. We will try and make this session as interactive as possible. Professor Benham will start with a short talk and we will quickly move into questions, and Nick will be able to see them coming up on the screen as we go through, so he will ask as many as we've got time for. I hope you enjoy this webinar, and thank you again very much for joining us today. I'll now hand over to Professor Benham to tell us more about the dark web.
Thank you, James. Good afternoon, everybody. Obviously, the weather will be good out there. It's also good here in the United Kingdom. I'm talking to you today from Cheltenham in the United Kingdom, which is the cyber centre of the United Kingdom, and obviously where our government spy centre is, which we're not supposed to mention. I'm going to talk to you over the next half an hour around the dark web. More and more it's becoming an issue, and I'll explain why. And certainly as technology increases and gets better and better, particularly the introduction of 5G, it's going to expand. It's going to become a very profitable area for criminals. But before I do that, I just want to share with you a wider view of the threat landscape. And then I'll take you into the dark web, talk to you about exactly what it is, what the threats are, but more importantly, what you can do as businesses and individuals to protect both your businesses and your families. As James said, it will be interactive. We have some surveys as we go through, which I hope that you'll enjoy, with some very interesting questions. We also have obviously the capability to take questions from you, and Nick will gather those. So please send me your questions. More than delighted to answer absolutely anything that you want to throw my way. Now I've just got a few slides I want to go through with you to put the whole threat landscape into context, and I won't go through this verbatim, but I think there are probably three important areas within these statistics for the UAE. I think that worldwide we've already seen 38 million new pieces of malware. So that's viruses, bugs, things that can go wrong with your technology. That's a huge number, and there's definitely a business there being driven to disrupt the internet and business generally, largely from cyber criminals. also from just individuals who are malicious, but also now we're obviously seeing a lot from nation states who are seeking to disrupt other countries for both political and economic benefit. From a technical point of view, which is obviously where I come into this, the most troubling part for me is a lot of the bugs or the viruses that are now being made to go out there have a very large amount of investment in them, and they are actually polymorphic, which means that not only is someone producing just a virus to send out there to do something, they're actually producing something that's very clever and something that can constantly change to evade detection. That makes it very, very sophisticated. And this is why cybersecurity is becoming such a big industry. With the introduction of 5G, artificial intelligence and the like, that risk is probably the biggest one facing any nation or any business or any citizen. How do we defend against it? But we'll talk about that a bit later on. Your part of the world is absolutely delightful. I'm a big fan of the Middle East generally, and the UAE and Dubai, particularly for all the excellent work that you're doing with smart cities, with the introduction of cutting edge technology, and obviously making your area a digital leader in the world. But that comes at a price, and I'm also very aware that because of the amount of revenue that you generate, the sophistication of what you're introducing, you are also very much a target for cyber criminals. There's a stat there that says 82% of all companies surveyed in the Middle East said that they'd been attacked. Clearly, that's 100%. How many people would admit to it obviously depends on obviously maintaining reputation, but more importantly than that, no one wants to admit they've been compromised, and some people just don't realise. But it's definitely a fact that the threat landscape is definitely evolving. Here in the United Kingdom, I work very closely with the National Crime Agency, Europol, Interpol, and a lot of the law enforcement agencies. And whilst this is UK centric, you know, the NCA, the National Crime Agency here, have produced quite a good model for tackling serious and organised crime. But we have a big issue as well with the City of London being obviously in the United Kingdom. We see an awful lot of crime-related fraud, particularly digital and cyber fraud happening. In terms of the dark web, so that's really the threat landscape. But if we look at the dark web in particular, that also has become very, very sophisticated over the last 10 years. The slide I've just put up just talks about a company that's trading on the dark web, or was trading on the dark web till it was taken down, called Alphabay. Clearly someone has a sense of humour, because it's like eBay for criminals. But what's staggering about this is that it was set up in very much the same way. But what is staggering is that up to 2017, it had turned around $3 billion worth of business and had done over 3 million Bitcoin transactions. And I'll also talk about Bitcoin on a future slide. So this is big, big business. So the dark web, and I think I read somewhere, and it's totally, this is without any foundation, but they say it's the third largest trading area in the world. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But certainly it's a problem, and it's a problem for businesses, citizens, and nations that wish to trade properly. Because of course people don't pay tax on the dark web, so it does have significant tax advantages. The slide I've just put up, the criminals, I'm not sure if it's a sense of humour or whether it's having good business acumen, but they call their sites things like the Halo and Wall Street. But again, behind the facade and the branding, there's serious criminality trading in undesirable things going on, and a heck of a lot of Bitcoin transactions and cryptocurrency transactions going on. So just before we go to our first survey, it would be remiss of me not to talk to you about COVID-19 and where we find ourselves today, and how that's impacting on the dark web. It's actually benefiting the dark web, the criminals that sit within it. We're seeing a huge increase in two areas. The first area is the sale of illegal drugs and substances and magic cures. And the criminals are playing on people's vulnerabilities, encourage them to go into the dark web, encourage them to buy, cures for COVID-19 and similar things. And of course, sat at home feeling slightly desperate, they are having access to a computer. The dark web is relatively easy to access. And again, I will explain that later on. The other key area that we've seen, and I'm sure that you've all seen it in your email boxes and on your phones, is that the number of spoof emails, texts that are coming through, enticing us to click on things that perhaps we shouldn't. And because our business, for a lot of us, are, we're working from home on our laptops, as I am today talking to you, it presents the criminals with an ideal opportunity to get into places that they wouldn't normally do. Working from home generally, not for all companies, presents a big security risk. It's far easier for me, if I was a cyber criminal, to hack into your home network and into your PC with your workplace there than it is within a work environment. So I'd like to go to the survey, our first survey, and obviously I'll ask the question and pass to Nick. So you do not have to answer this, but I would be greatly appreciated if you could answer this honestly. But have you actually been on the dark web at any time?
Thanks, Richard. Okay, great. So we've got people polling away, which is great. Fantastic, you guys are engaged. I personally, I did dabble going onto the dark web, Richard, many years ago. Really, for a very brief period of time, I was more curious about sort of downloading the Onion router and then getting onto it and seeing really to what degree the search engines have differed very drastically to the familiar ones around Google and what have you. I got cold feet probably within about 30 minutes, came out very quickly, uninstalled Tor, wiped the laptop and never went back again after that, to be perfectly honest. So
we'll believe you, Nick, we'll believe you. I somehow don't. So you went for investigation purposes only. I understand. Your secret's safe with me.
Indeed. And then you read a lot going forward, and you just think, wow, actually, you do open yourself up to a lot of vulnerabilities if you're not very careful with with what you're doing. Okay, so let's have a look at the results there. Thank you everybody for that. Let's just share the results there. And wow, so only 10% of you have been on the dark web, and 90% haven't. That's pretty interesting, Richard. How do you think that compares with our previous poll within the EMEA region?
Yeah, so certainly within Europe and the area, it was about 90% said yes and 10% said no. I do appreciate the part of the world that you're obviously sat in. That I believe in some states it's still it's actually illegal to access the dark web. So, but for those 10%, thank you for your candor. And I think for the rest of you, I think if you haven't been on it, then that's excellent news, and I'll explain why. But very interesting, and I said the exact reverse for Europe. So interesting. So I'm going to give you the information as to how to get onto the dark web, but clearly I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. But as I said, I'll pick that up later on in the presentation. Thank you, everybody. That's a really interesting stat.
Richard, can I just, I've got a question coming in just before we jump into this. Somebody's gone back asking about the action fraud figures there for 2018 that you presented.
Yes.
And there were some pretty significant numbers there, around, if I can remember now, 37% or 37 billion cost to the UK economy.
Yes.
And some very high figures for reporting to action fraud. In your experience to date, are those figures climbing, plateauing, declining, do you think?
Yeah, so two things. Certainly within the UK, we use action fraud, but that's almost been overwhelmed by the response over the last couple of years. And certainly law enforcement agencies and companies, whilst we still encourage them to share intelligence because that helps us in the battle against crime, many companies and particularly larger institutions are very reluctant to report anything because it causes reputational damage. So there's definitely a balance there, and certainly the big banks in Europe were, and some of the global players were very reluctant to disclose obviously the attacks that they have. Having said that, the openness has come, I think, just through necessity, because I think big business like the law enforcement agencies know they have to work together, so there has to be an element of mutual trust. Those figures are accelerating. They are going up year on year, and as I said, this still remains a large proportion of things that aren't reported.
Great, thank you.
So that will cheer everybody up. So that's a nice but unfortunately, that is the reality of where we find ourselves, I'm afraid. So a lot of people ask me, well, what is the dark web? What does it mean? How does it relate to the World Wide Web? And what does it mean for all my sensitive data? Is that on the dark web, or is it on the internet, or whatever? The first thing to explain is that the web is effectively, as we know it, the World Wide Web is everything that we search upon. When we use Google, we use Bing, Yahoo. All our everyday searching on the internet tends to go through the World Wide Web to find websites that can obviously help us. Underneath that, and what exists on the internet, is something called the deep web. And actually, it's probably described wrongly. It is both the deep web and deep net. But effectively, it's where all the financial records, it's where all emails, it's where all Twitters and social media, it's where anything that we put a password on and encrypt, or we have a gateway to going into, is stored. And all of that information makes up about 90% of what we would define as being on the web. So we have effectively 5% that we use on the World Wide Web, 90% which is all of the information and bits that we use to transact. And that's the bit that we protect as businesses, because that's the bit that, you know, that all businesses not just businesses, academia, governments, that they all run on and where they store it. But right at the bottom of that is something called the dark web. And this is effectively about 5% again. And this is restricted to special browsers. You can only get on here with a special browser. It tends not to be indexed. So by putting in a generic term, it's very hard to find what you want. So you have to know why you're going into the dark web, and you have to know what you're looking for. That said, when you do go in, it's very, very easy to find all sorts of bad stuff. The big characteristic of the dark web is that largely it's illegal behavior that goes on there, but it's anonymous. It means that you can log on without being identified, and you can transact without being identified. So it is a criminal's paradise. There are also benefits to governments, to both military and also to counterterrorism and intelligence bodies as well. But primarily, the dark web has evolved into a place for criminals. So the next question I always get asked is, well, why do they exist? Well, I've explained to you why the deep web exists. That has to exist so that we can transact confidential information across the internet to enable us to use the internet and to use the World Wide Web to do business, you know, to send things confidentially and to just transact a lot of our business. And to be perfectly honest, a lot of the world's trade, banking and everything now exists through the deep web. But why does the dark web exist? I mean, if it's that bad, why don't we just shut it down? Well, there was actually an attempt to shut it down a few years ago, but it is so difficult to shut down because everything's anonymous, because there is this pressing belief that the internet must remain free. It's a very, very difficult thing to police. And as soon as you shut something down, something appears in its place. The introduction of Bitcoin has clearly enhanced that capability for people to transact. So the dark web won't necessarily disappear. It will evolve and it will change. And with the new technologies, with 5G, the use of what's called peer-to-peer data transfer, that is without the need to go through the internet or the like, the problem's going to remain. It will just manifest itself in a different way. But as we sit here today, the dark web does exist. We can't shut it down, but what we can do is modify our behavior to protect ourselves. There are some positive sides to the dark web. Sorry,
Richard, just to jump in there, because we've got a question that's very pertinent to the shutting down. And the fact that you mentioned how difficult it is, and we have a question here saying, well, if you can't shut it down, can you not make it illegal to download the browsers which access it such as tool? So it sounds a fair question.
I think that's exactly the right question, and I know that governments and law enforcement agencies are looking at that. But there is this constant dilemma that if you took away the browsers, somebody would just invent another one now because everyone understands the mechanics. But there is this call for freedom on the internet that goes against security, and we're seeing it more and more. It's one of the big ethical questions around the use of the internet. You know, how much should the state restrict access for citizens on the freedom of information, and at what point does it become a security issue, or what point does it become illegal? Now, in the real world, that's quite straightforward to know, but everything's a little bit ambiguous when you're online, and particularly if you're anonymous, it's very difficult, even if someone's doing something wrong, to actually find who's actually doing it wrong. There's also a call for, and I've mentioned it on this slide, journalistic reporting, research, intelligence sharing, and a lot of the spy agencies around the world will use the dark web to transact information. And indeed, the dark web started up as a military-based tool. I think it's for the US Navy many years ago. And there is an irony that they still fund part of the dark web and part of Tor, which they obviously introduced to enable that to happen. So journalists would say, well, actually, we want to keep this anonymous capability on the web because, of course, we want freedom of information. A very timely ethical issue for governments and business and everyone to decide on. And I think the need to protect citizens will effectively always override that. But there is that battle going on at the moment. So I've mentioned that what's on the dark web. I need to focus and tell you what's bad on the dark web, just so you know, if you've never been on there, if you do go on there, what you can expect to see. Stolen information. Any information that's stolen, any data breach. British Airways was a particular recent one, but there are many examples of huge data breaches across the globe. Every time data is stolen, almost within hours, it finds itself on the dark web for sale. If I was a cyber criminal, that's the area I'd go for, quite simply because it carries low risk, and you can sell it relatively quickly. People will always buy credit card numbers. They'll always buy people's passwords. There are a lot of people out there that will pay money for that. If you get in right at the beginning of a breach, you can get pounds or dollars, tens of dollars for the information. But obviously, as it gets shared more and more, you can get fractions of cents, fractions of pounds for the information. But because it's always stolen in bulk, it's always worth money. Illegal drugs and substances. I've mentioned COVID-19 and obviously the increase in this area on the dark web. The purchase of not just recreational hard drugs, prescription drugs. We also see illegal substances being traded on here as well, and that can be bioweapons and the like. The most gruesome part, and this is the one that tends to get more publicity than others, is obviously child pornography, the use of human trafficking, sale of body parts, counterfeit goods and banknotes, and also weapons can also be purchased on the dark web. And for me as a citizen, that does disturb me, probably more than the others, even though the others are bad. And I think for that reason, I think this is why the law enforcement agencies are so keen to police the dark web, but it's not good.
Richard, can I just ask you a quick question then, which is coming in from the audience? And the question is around: are there any specific risks then for the UAE, and do you have any examples?
Yeah, so the UAE in particular, because you're very digitally advanced and you're investing huge sums of money in your digital infrastructure. I mean, the smart cities are phenomenally impressive. The risks are considerably more. And I think when 5G comes in, and I was going to expect this question later on, what is the biggest benefit of 5G? The biggest benefit of 5G is that you can create smart cities. You can have speeds and capacity that are just 10, 12, 15 times faster than 4G. But more importantly than that, it's an enabler. It's the point at which we don't remain in control. We pass that trust on to the technology, because the technology will be faster than we can think and react. and we will create intelligent environments in our cities and within our workplaces, so that the machinery and technology does things for us faster, quicker, but also at a speed that we can't effectively control in real time. Now, there are real advantages to that, massive, huge advantages in terms of being able to transact, being able to offer products that are so much more customized to what businesses and people want. But it comes at a price, and the price of that is that you create a bigger vulnerability. So for me, within the UAE, it's the pace of the technology, it's the speed of the technology that presents the risk to you, not the technology itself. And it's just having an awareness of where it could possibly go wrong, which will leave you vulnerable. Having said that, you know, it is possible to build in security measures into any new technology, but that worries me slightly, that the use of 5G will also create artificial criminals. So you won't just be physical criminals, we'll see a lot more artificial intelligence, something called bots, which are effectively man-made little programs. You'll see those becoming more and more sophisticated. So when I spoke at the beginning of the talk about viruses becoming more sophisticated, if you have an intelligent environment and you are investing lots of money in 5G and creating, as you are in the UAE, you also need to ensure that the investment goes into defending proactively, in my view, some of the threats that will evolve. That said, and we had the question earlier, and I put it on the slide here, the onion router is illegal to use in some Middle Eastern countries, and I believe it is still illegal to use it in the UAE. And I don't think that's a bad thing. Personally, that's my personal view. However, the rest of the world doesn't seem to have quite so much of an issue. As I said before, it was originally used by the military to access a very secret sort of form of communication, and somewhere along the line it sort of lost control, and the criminals have moved in. What I didn't mention earlier is virtually everything within the dark web tends to have encryption, and the reason it's called an onion is because as you go into it, there are layers and layers of encryption like an onion, which effectively means that no one can see who you are. So that's why Tor is used. It's why it's called an onion, is it just keeps you anonymous. So Nick, you're probably all right. They probably didn't realize it was you.
Good to hear.
Just before we go to our next survey again, what's banned on the dark web? I mentioned cryptocurrencies, particularly Bitcoin has been a big enabler on the dark web to enable criminals to transact, and of course the use of money laundering is well documented on that. We're seeing a lot more cryptocurrencies being introduced. We're also seeing barter being used as well, so the provision of one service against another. And again, that all helps to keep buyers and sellers anonymous from each other. So, a survey. So, have you personally, any of you, experienced identity or credit card fraud? So this is a question for you personally rather than for your business. And I'm interested to know because it'll give me a good benchmark as to obviously how vulnerable you feel that you are.
Sorry, I was on mute. And great. Well, everybody's just responding to the poll there. Thank you for this. Nearly 75% in. Quick circle back on one of the questions here from the audience, Richard. And just a clarification on, I suppose, content that is available on the dark web. And the question is the person asks, you know, we're focusing really on financial data, but does the dark web include things like downloading a newly released film or streaming a live sporting event? Is this the same or is it different?
No, absolutely. You can buy most things on the dark web, particularly if it's a newly released film. Although there tend to be websites on the World Wide Web that will enable you to do that. You can also purchase these boxes, streaming boxes, and we do see it in more developed countries, particularly where there's state censorship, where a lot of citizens do buy streaming boxes. So I act as an advisor for the FA Premier League, which is the Premier League in the United Kingdom. And one of our biggest challenges, particularly in the Far East, more than anywhere else, is that people buy these illegal boxes to watch Premier League football matches. And it causes big problems because they don't know where the boxes come from, and immediately, you know, not only are they illegal from a copyright and point of view, but more importantly than that, people put themselves at risks if they connect them into their PCs, because again, any streaming box that you buy to complete an illegal activity can have consequences on your other technology and your other devices.
Fantastic.
Did that answer the question? I'm not sure. Did that answer the question, Nick?
Yes, yeah, I think it did. I think, you know, essentially, there's a lot of content that you probably can get at all different levels, be it
yes, you can. Yes, you can. But for streaming films, there are easier ways than going into the dark web, I think. But
yes. Yeah, I think that would be quite a risky activity to try and find your favourite football team on the dark web. Okay, great. Well, so 87% of you voted, so I'll close that now and share the results with you, which, Richard, I think that's quite significantly higher than what we saw with the EMEA poll, if I'm not mistaken.
What are we looking at, Nick? I haven't got the figures, sorry.
So this, hang on, why that should have, can everybody else see the poll results? That should say 67% have experienced identity or credit card fraud, and 33% haven't out of 88% who voted. Yeah,
so that's pretty typical at the moment, and again, that figure has increased significantly. Certainly cyber criminals who focus on identity or credit card fraud are quite sophisticated now. And certainly within the banks, I know that in a lot of global banks, they factor in as part of the fraud, into their risk model that they're going to lose a certain percentage. But what we're finding is that, it seems to be accelerating away. So 67% is about right, I would say. And again, just highlights the problem that this is a real problem, not an imaginary one. And whilst banks particularly and organisations tend to refund against genuine cybercrime, we are finding that some of them are starting to ask questions now about where the liability lies for a credit card fraud. So interesting.
Well, we have a question coming in as well, actually. That is there a Google of the dark web so you can search to see if you're on it?
Yes, we were going to come to that at the end. There are various organisations that offer the ability to put either your email in or some other details, and to search the dark web to see whether you're on it. I personally, I would only ever go to somebody who is reputable in doing that. There's always a risk that if someone goes into the dark web with your details, you might find your details on the dark web. So for that reason, you should only use a reputable organisation and someone of standing to undertake that search for you. And again, it's a useful thing to do, because whilst there may be no indication that there's any wrongdoing, that if your details have been taken, say, from a major breach. So I'll give you an example. So BA had a breach of 300,000 customers and credit card details. I was one of those. I was aware that my credit card went straight onto the dark web. I cancelled the credit card, and that was it. And then there was no issue for me. But if I hadn't have known that, then that would have been possibly a useful example of why I would need to have a look at the dark web. There's nothing wrong with searching it, for sure, but I would always do it through a recognised third party.
Thank you.
Such as Acuris, because I think you offer that, don't you? Yeah.
We do offer a service, and I think we'll come into that onto that in a little bit more detail later on. But yeah, thank you.
Okay, so a lot of the things on the slide here we've covered already in speaking to you, but again, just two key points that I want to highlight. I talked about the sophistication of people getting into your machine from those black boxes if they happen to be browsing. Almost certainly, if you go onto the dark web, either through Tor or through some other device, the criminals there and the people that exist there would almost certainly try and find how to cross-contaminate the device that you're looking at the dark web on, and it's quite common for them to get you to click on a website on the dark web and release a bug into your system. And the most common thing we're seeing is that they look to take over your webcam. As a single point of vulnerability for anybody, if I can get control of your webcam, not only can I see your everyday life, potentially incriminating imagery, particularly if you're a celebrity or somebody of standing, but more importantly, I can see you conduct your bank details. I can see you do a whole lot of things. So more and more, the biggest risk of going on the dark web, even if you don't click anything. So Nick said he went on, but his biggest risk was that his machine had been contaminated. The other thing that I wanted to highlight was that law enforcement agencies no longer are accepting curiosity or a mistaken keystroke as a reason to go onto the dark web. You have to specifically download a browser. You specifically have to go into it, and more, they're not relying on that as a reliable legal offence, particularly with illegal child images and the purchase of anything that's illegal at all. And of course, lots of law enforcement agencies run stings on the dark web. So even if you're clicking on a site, it may actually be being run by a law enforcement agency who will use it to track you down. So there are more risks on the dark web than you realise. Now, what does that mean for the UAE? So obviously, I've spoken generically about the dark web, but I wanted to focus on your region, which, as I said, is doing fantastic things. It would be remiss of me not to at least just point these out to you. But because you have quite a large number of banks, fund transfer organisations, huge telecoms infrastructure, and of course the huge revenues and employment from oil and gas, you are very much a target. And the target can be financial from criminals, but it can also be political. And we see more and more, obviously, within the Middle East, the use of cyber attacks and manipulation online for political purposes, and that includes fake news and everything else. And of course, we also see a military presence as well, where a lot of nation states now, including the United Kingdom, are seeing the cyber capability as being part of their warfare capability, and it would be remiss for me not to mention that. So there are always those risks that exist. There's also a drive for destabilization, which I've noticed, but again, the building of your infrastructure, the way you're doing it, I think is tackling that very well. And of course, the terrorist activity that's related to the dark web and what goes through it, again, remains a risk for us all, not just for the UAE. So just quickly before we go into the next survey, people have often asked me, well, actually, I quite like what you're saying to me. I don't pay tax. I want to build a dark web business. So to highlight how easy it is for just from an individual to build a dark web business, then what I'd like to do is just quickly take you through how you build a dark web business. So you'll see on the right of the slide, I've invented a logo. Just like a normal business on the dark web, a criminal will invent a logo. I'll have my mission statement, which is always pretty generic, which is to make money by exploiting people without being caught. But that mission statement can be something different. It could, for instance, be to destabilize a competitor. It could be to cause disruption. But the only kit that I need to get into business on the dark web is a computer or smartphone or something similar, internet access, a bit of encryption software, which I can download for free, to set up a fake bank account and cryptocurrency, and a dark web browser. And all of those things are available effectively for free just by Googling how to do them. So, there's an irony there that, that the internet enables anybody who wants to be a criminal, not only to become a criminal, but it even tells them how to do it. And for that reason, if we were to set up a company, the websites are quite professional, they use imagery, and to be honest, they look very similar to those on the World Wide Web, except they're selling very, very dangerous things. And you also see the terminology changing on the dark web. We see criminals now using words such as data services, galleries, medications, and protection, rather than the hard reality of what they are. And that's to make people feel a little bit better about buying it. Now, you could argue that people buying it don't care, but they're trying to capture as many people as they can. In terms of the products and services that we would offer as a typical business, stolen ID, emails, passwords, personal information, very easy to get, very easy to pass on. We'd also focus, if I was to do this, on the sale of company financial sensitive information, anything that we can get that's embarrassing, anything that that gives us that has some sort of value in terms of information. Illegal images, drugs, weapons and poisons, and all of those other bits and pieces as well. Even as we said before, the streaming of new films that haven't been released. Whatever it is, we can set up a product or service for it. So I want you all to imagine, and I hate to say this to you, that you're all cyber criminals, that we've all set that business up, and we have a list there. And we're going to look at risk and reward. So what I want to ask you is, which do you think is the most lucrative product or service from our list? And by lucrative, I mean, which one do you think will generate us the most money with the less risk?
Excellent. So everybody's now voting, which is fantastic. A question from the audience about how do we protect ourselves from working from home, basically. Obviously in these uncharted times, what are the risks that are posed, and how do we guard against those? I think we'll probably come onto that in a little bit shortly with a more in-depth question. But anything from a high-level perspective, Richard, you don't want to cover at this stage while we're waiting for everyone to vote?
Yeah, I mean, there are three things that effectively you can protect yourself at home from, and these are very, very high level, very straightforward, but you'll be surprised how many people don't do them. The first one is obviously make sure that you've got a reasonable password in place, and if possible to have 2 sets of passwords, so 2-factor passwords if you can. The second one is to keep all your antivirus software up to date on your device. Very easy to do and very easy to click on, but so many people just don't do it. And the third one is, if you've got a router at home, most providers will enable you to put some sort of parental check on it, or put some parental control on it. They're really, really useful because, again, it's just another line of defense. Now, those 3 things won't necessarily help you if you have a targeted attack, but what they do is they reduce the risk, and anything you can do to reduce the risk is a good thing. And you'll be surprised how many people don't even do those basic 3 things.
Fantastic.
I mean, I was always guilty years ago of having the same password for everything, which is an absolute cardinal sin. But of course, years ago on the internet, the only way you could remember your password was by having the same one for everything. But criminals know that now, and if your details do appear on the dark web, they, for one account, they will try that password on a whole load of different accounts as well.
Excellent, thank you, Richard. So the results are in. Thank you, 73% of you voted. So clearly, stolen identity, emails, passwords, and personal information highest in terms of the most lucrative product, 56%. Thoughts, Richard?
Yeah, and that's absolutely right. And criminals are lazy. They don't want to get caught for trading images or drugs or guns, because if they do get caught, there are custodial sentences or worse involved. Being caught with stolen data, I don't think there's any. I'm just trying to think. Certainly in Europe, most legal processes, they don't take that seriously, so it does represent least risk, maximum reward, and for that reason, that's why we're finding cyber criminals are focusing on the acquiring of and selling of sensitive personal data, IDs, and passwords. So that's good. We're in business, I think, together there. So I think we've all identified where the biggest area as a cyber criminal is, but on the other side for us, it also represents obviously the biggest risk as well. And we talk about, and I won't necessarily go through this slide, but we've chosen to go for information to sell, sensitive information to sell, but there are many other things. By having a presence and a brand on the dark web, we can also generate revenue, and we will get inquiries, people asking for images, drugs, arms inquiries, sensitive information, and as a business, all that we do is we sell them on. So we don't get involved. So someone makes a referral for drugs, we sell it on to another partner on the dark web and receive a payment for that. So we can trade in something that's relatively low risk, but it doesn't stop us from helping other criminals and people who want bad things to get what they want. And that's again why the dark web represents a threat. You know, there's a lot of people facilitating the acquiring of bad stuff on the basis of reselling. It operates very much like a business community on the dark web, and we have to realize that this is just not a bunch of guys or a bunch of old criminals trying to rip people off. These are very, very sophisticated organizations that are running these very much along business lines. So I mentioned the chances of being caught are very low. There are many reasons why across the world it's very difficult. One, we talked about it being anonymous, so straight away you don't even know who's doing the crime, and you can't even find out who it is. And for that reason, that's why it costs the police lots of money to do stings, to set up false websites on the dark web, you know, to do undercover operations on the dark web. It's very, very expensive and very time consuming. So, you know, our chances of being caught for our business are low because the policing costs are so high. The actual speed of transactions, and I know that when I worked in banking, you know, if we had a fraud and someone stole money, it could be bounced around the globe 4 or 5 times through various accounts before we'd even realised that it'd gone, and even before the police and law enforcement agencies got involved. And I think again, you know, one of the problems is really the speed at which, if money is stolen or payments are made, it's just the speed at which it disappears. And I mentioned earlier what we call P2P networks, peer-to-peer networks, which are like small little communities that exist that actually nobody can get into. So technology allows one device to talk to another, and we see that with mobile phones being able to share files and bits without the need to go through the internet. And again, for the UAE, because you're going to introduce intelligent environments, so you know your whole Internet of Things, your whole cities that you build will have intelligent environments that react to what's around them. The use of peer-to-peer networks will be massive, because you need that to make your intelligent environments work. So again, one of the things I would recommend for anybody that's in that space is that if you do have peer-to-peer networks, you very much look at the security of them, because again, you know, that will be an area of vulnerability.
Great,
Nick.
Richard. So yeah, thank you. So at this stage, I think, you know, we've heard a lot of information here, there's been a lot of detail. Some of it quite scary, I have to admit, but you know, obviously there's good things that we can potentially do to mitigate some of these risks. So could I invite James from Themis back on and pose a question to you, James? And that is, from a practical perspective, what are the key steps companies should be taking to help manage the risks associated with cybercrime during this COVID-19 pandemic?
Thanks, Nick. Yeah, I mean, from a corporate perspective, obviously things have changed significantly since COVID-19, and the threat has increased, as we've heard from Professor Benham. But I mean, firstly, I think the important thing is to understand the threats you're exposed to as a business. Understanding the issue is the first step, and just by the fact that lots of people are on this webinar suggests that everyone's seeking information, which is great. Attend as many webinars like these as you can, and read as much sort of information and papers as you can. Encourage your teams to do the same. Secondly, I think understanding the specific risks your business is exposed to is very important. This is obviously unique for all businesses, as it depends entirely on how you operate, who your clients are, what products you offer, what, you know, via what channels, how much data you hold, etc., etc. Thirdly, I think for corporates to map out their control framework, it is extremely important in this day and age. From a governance perspective, having identified the risks you're exposed to, it's important to set appropriate controls against those that are commensurate to the size and nature of your business. So, you know, many companies will have, you know, the policies and procedures in place to mitigate this. but do they have the right systems, tools, governance, and MI to ensure that the controls are actually effective and you are actually protecting your business? And that's something that Themis can very much help with. We provide a health check service where we come in and assess or audit your current cyber or financial crime controls, and we test the effectiveness of those. We can also help with designing the right policies, processes, and the wider control framework if companies don't already have this in place. So, look at what systems and tools are out there to help you manage the risks that you're specifically exposed to as a business. There are many different security products, including email and network firewalls out there. Acuris also have a monitoring tool that allows you to understand how your staff are using the web, including the dark web. So you get requisite alerts if staff are doing things that they shouldn't be doing. We can also help members understand what technology solutions are out there in the market and which might be right for their companies specifically. And lastly, I think that people is very often the biggest risk in any business, because technology is essentially follows rules that you set, whereas people are a bit more unpredictable. So making sure that your teams are well versed in the risks that we've talked about, and providing continuous training, education to help them. And as business leaders, you want to create this awareness and have the right mitigating controls, ensure that they're deeply embedded in your corporate DNA and culture.
Great, thank you, James. I know we are running fairly tight on time, so I'll hand back to Richard. Thank you.
Yes, okay. So just to wrap up from my end. So I work with several law enforcement agencies across the globe, and just on a very simplistic level here, there are just some very, very simple things that you can do to protect yourself. Please do share intelligence with trusted law enforcement agencies. And I say trusted, you've got to feel happy, but by sharing intelligence, it does make policing easier to catch the bad guys, as big as the threat may be. I also think the online due diligence of new staff and customers is important. In financial services in particular, that's quite a mature model, the vetting that goes on. But there are an awful lot of industries where there needs to be a little bit more vetting of staff, particularly regarding, do they have a presence on the dark web? Is there information on the dark web? Do you need to do a social media check and the like? I also think cyber awareness training for all employees should be mandatory. Now, that is actually happening here in the West with GDPR within Europe. The law has changed, which effectively has meant that now has become effectively mandatory. But I do think for everybody, even a little bit of awareness training takes away quite a large amount of risk. And in the COVID-19, working from home is generally less secure. You just need to be aware of it. So, depending on what information you want to have from home or what emails you want to send, it's just an awareness of it. And the last bit that I want to really leave with you before we go to the very last survey is, if you ever want to use the dark web without a legal reason, just don't. There are just so many risks attached, even with downloading the browsers and going on there for you personally, that unless you do have a legal reason, all I would ask is, please don't go on the dark web. It is not a good place to go. Now, I have teenage children, and they are particularly vulnerable to the temptations of the dark web. So if you are a parent with teenage children, it's always worthwhile just making sure that they understand the risks of that. In terms of we've got two last questions just to finish up with. The first one is, and hopefully this is a yes, given that I've presented to you for the last 40 minutes. Do you believe the dark web represents a threat to your organization?
Okay, votes coming in thick and fast here. 41% of you voted so far. 46, 52%, 56%, 57, 63. Just give you another couple of minutes because I know time is tight, and I do have an interesting question I do want to ask as well. Okay, 68% voted. I'll close it out there and share the results. I think you've done a good job there, Richard. Yes, certainly appears to be a threat to your organisation.
Unfortunately, it is. I'm sorry about that. And just quickly then, the next poll. And I think James alluded to this, but don't be swayed by him. Do you believe it is your people or your technology that is the biggest security weakness in your organization?
Good question indeed. Yeah, it's as we've seen. I mean, the threats are all around us, aren't they? You know, it's really, you know, you can throw all the hardware you like at a problem and all the smart technology as well. But the criminals are, you know, they always seem to be one step ahead of us, don't they? And they're well funded, you know, they're well organized, and they make a lot of money out of this. So they're generally ahead of us in terms of you know, capabilities. And obviously, you know, you alluded to the 5G world and everything becoming digital and smart cities, and you know, the threat is unlikely to go away anytime soon. So, okay, I'll close that and share the results. And 67% voted. Thank you. Resounding result there, I think, Richard.
Is it people?
It is people. Sorry, you can't see that. 83% say people and 17% say technology.
Yeah, I mean, it used to be technology. Now it seems to be people. You know, people do silly things either for the right reasons, either because they're vulnerable or because they just want to offer good customer service. We see time and time again, people want to be helpful when dealing with customers, but they sometimes do that at the expense of their data security. So good. Well, that's good. So Nick, that's all from me, and thank you to all of you for listening to me. I'm obviously open for questions now, but conscious of time. So Nick, do we have a few questions to finish up with?
We do. With only 3 minutes left, though, I think we might have to defer and actually answer these questions for you via Themis Senate page.
We can do that. Right.
So let me hand back to James to close out the session. Big thanks to the audience, great questions, and I hope you found that very interesting.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Professor Bunham. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I'm afraid we're going to have to draw time on this really fascinating discussion. Thank you to all our guests who have joined today, and for those of you who have taken part in the polls and asked so many interesting questions. This is actually part of a wider exploration of the threats associated with the dark web that we are hosting in partnership with Acuris. Our members may continue the conversation on the Themis Senate, our online Q&A portal, as Nick just mentioned. Both Richard and Nick will be on the Themis Senate and ready to answer any further questions that you may have over the next few weeks. On your screen, there is a section entitled Handouts. You should see a number of resources that you can download from that, including information about this. And as a follow-on to this webinar, Acuris and Themis will soon be releasing a joint research paper which will explore the threats of the dark web in more detail. We also intend to host financial crime-related events in the Capital Club post-lockdown, and very much hope that some of you will be able to join us in Dubai for these. If you're interested in attending any of these or any other thought leadership events, webinars, podcasts, or online learning, then please register your interest on our website, and we'll send you details near the time. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank our partners today, the Capital Club, being a prestigious business club in Dubai, as well as Acuris Risk Intelligence, a global proprietary data vendor who have a number of specific monitoring tools to help firms mitigate some of the cyber risks that we've discussed today. I would also urge all of our Themis members to look at how you can use Acuris's specialist data sets and tools to enhance your financial crime controls. If you'd like any additional information, please don't hesitate to let us know. And a final thanks to our guest speaker today, one of the world's leading experts in this field. We're very lucky to have him with us. Professor Benham has kindly offered a free copy of his best-selling book, Cyber Strike London, to any of our guests who would like it. So, ladies and gentlemen, I hope this has been a thought-provoking and interesting webinar. Please do let us know if we can help you in any way post this discussion. Stay safe and well, and thank you again for your time. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.